Thank you for joining me today. My name is Vince, and we're going to be looking at the parable of the Dragnet. We want to find out specifically what the Dragnet is and about the fish caught in a net. Specifically, who are the good fish? Now, this parable, like the parable of the wheat and the tares, are the only two parables of Matthew 13 that specifically tell us that they are an end of the age fulfillment. Let's read the parable of the dragnet, sometimes referred to as the parable of the fish in the net. Matthew 13, verses 47 to 50. This is what it reads. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet cast into the sea, gathering fish of every kind. When it was filled, they threw it up on the beach, and they sat down and gathered the good fish into containers, but the bad they threw away. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth, take out the wicked from among the righteous, and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, it's very important that we understand that we're already given a lot of information within this parable from Jesus. It sets the context to some degree for us. But there are some things, again, that are not explained by Jesus. So, what we're going to do is we're going to start working from what we have. As you know, it's my common practice to start changing the parables, which are metaphorical, into literals. And I do that by starting a paraphrase. Now, we have a partial paraphrase we could build rather quickly because Jesus gave us a lot of information in verse 49 and verse 50. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the metaphors using the definition he's explained to us. And this is what it says. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet cast into the sea, and gathering people of every kind. And when it was filled, the angels drew it up on the beach. And they sat down and gathered the righteous people, which are the good fish, into containers. But the wicked the angels threw into the furnace of hell to suffer. So it shall be at the end of the age. Now, if we understand this, there's a lot of information that's telling us nothing new. We know people are going one place or the other at the end of the age. They're either going to be with Jesus and they're not going to be in Jesus if they're going into the furnace of hell. There are some things that are not explained. So we have to say these are pending. The dragnet, the sea, the fish we explained as people, but it says every kind. Might that mean something different? The beach and the containers. Actually, the sea starts from the concept of the waters that surrounded the earth in Genesis 1. Now, the idea here is there was an angelic revolt, and the waters symbolized the activity that was going on around the earth during that time. After Satan had been cast from heaven, after his angels had also been cast from heaven, and they were here surrounding the earth. Now, the earth at that particular time was formless and void. Eventually, the earth was given over to Satan because Adam fell. Now, it talks about this revolt in Psalm 74, verses 12 and 14, where God actually crushed the heads of Leviathan. Now, you'll notice it says heads. So we could look at it and we could see that it was a united kingdom at that point. It had other leaders as well in the angelic revolt. By the time we look at Isaiah 27:1, in that day, it's talking about a future day now, the day of the Lord, he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. So you notice in the sea here. So Satan today is alive within his realm of the sea, and he has to be dealt with before the events of the parable of the dragnet take place. Daniel 7, 3 and 4. You notice I'm pulling up little tidbits. I'm not really going throughout the entirety of the verses, but I'm putting some extra verse numbers up there in case you want to go ahead and look back at those verses. But in Daniel 7, 3 and 4, it says, four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. Now, beasts do not live in the sea. So it's actually talking about they're coming up out of Satan's realm from his activity to do things on earth. Ezekiel 26:3, it talks about the effects of his rule, which is many nations. Actually, there's only one nation right now he does not rule, and that's Israel. Now, it says about Tyre, it says he will bring up many nations against Tyre as the sea brings up its waves. Now, many nations and the sea are being related there. And the idea is that it shows up that the activities of the sea result in the coming up of nations against Tyre. So again, the sea is symbolic of many nations. As we know, they're under the control of Satan. Isaiah 23:11, God has stretched his hand out over the sea, and he has made the kingdoms tremble. Therefore, we see the sea has kingdoms and they tremble. So the implication of the sea is they fear God. They're under control of Satan, but they have this fear of God. The sea is currently Satan's realm. They are the nations that he controls. So, why are angels gathering good fish, people, for themselves? Throughout the Bible, we have examples where people are described as fish, and there's the intention to go gathered fish. Now, let me show you an example here in Habakkuk 1:14 and 15. Habakkuk's asking God, why have thou made men like fish of the sea, like creeping things without a ruler over them? The Chaldeans bring all of them up with a hook and drag them away with their net. So, if we understand what's going on here, the Chaldeans are gathering people for captivity, for enslavement. So, they have a purpose for gathering people. And Habakkuk is asking God, why do you let them get away with it, God? The apostles also were called to gather people. And in their case, they're gathering them to serve the Lord. In Mark 1:17, it says, follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men. Therefore, the apostles were selected to gather men for the Lord himself. The angels here gather men for God as well. And it says that the good fish are put in containers while the bad ones, well, they go into the furnace of fire. So why are they being gathered? There's a placement. Fish gathering or people gathering is for a placement and a purpose. So you had for enslavement with the Chaldeans, and Mark, you had to serve the Lord. And here in the angel, God has a different use for the good fish that he has selected. Let's define our dragnet. Let's go back and take a look at that Calvian verse and add some of the words right after what we had already read. It says in Habakkuk, the Chaldeans bring up all of them with a hook, drag them away with their net, and gather them together in their fishing net. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they offer a sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their fishing nets, because through these things their catch is large and their food is plentiful. So we're reading some strange things here, some great poetic imagery. What the heck is being talked about? Well, about the net. First of all, there's something we recognize. whenever the net was used, it was to gather people, and we recognize these were people that were being gathered for captivity. However, we also noticed that there was more than people being gathered because there was food involved. I love food. And they were glad because their catch was large and the food was plentiful. In other words, what happened here is they not only got the fish, they got everything the fish had. See, a net doesn't separate things out. It just hauls in whatever's there when it's a dragnet. But there's something that is even more precious here because it reveals who the dragnet is. In the case of the Chaldeans, which we find it will be relational to what we believe, in verse 16 it said, therefore they offer a sacrifice to their net, burn incense to their fishing nets. All I could say is, huh? How is that possible? How could you take something that you're using to gather people, to gather what they have, and then go make a sacrifice to it and burn incense to it? But when we understand it's the symbolism here, what they're showing is they understood it was the entity that they were counting on behind their success. In this case, it was demonic, it was the fallen angels. Because of the fallen angels, they said, that's their net. That's what brought us in these people. So what they did was they sacrificed to them because they were grateful. They went and burned incense to them because they felt they were entitled to it. They worshiped them. But we have to look at now our dragnet. If a fallen angelic host could bring in people for the Chaldeans for captivity, how much more could the good angels from heaven go into Satan's realm and gather all the people that lived in his realm, that lived in his sea? Before we go on, I'm going to ask you for a favor. Give me a thumbs up so we can move this video out there. Also consider subscribing if you want to look forward to future videos. The next one I'm planning on working on is setting up a structure on the parallels. I hope you'll subscribe so you can be sure to catch that one. Beach. The beach. Well, let's find out why we should fear coming on to the beach. Jeremiah 5:22 says, do you not fear me, declares the Lord? Do you not tremble in my presence? For I have placed the sand as a boundary for the sea, an eternal decree so it cannot cross over it. Though the waves toss, yet they cannot prevail. Though they roar, they cannot cross over it. What's being set up here is a type because God is equating trembling in his presence to coming on to the beach, the boundary line. He said it was an eternal decree. It was not to be violated. So Satan's realm of the nations, the seas roaring and making all the tumult that they want to make, cannot come into his presence. So there's something here that is implying because it is the end of the age that God will be present. You notice the little three letter word that says, for I have placed the sand for I. See, tremble in my presence. Don't cross over this. This point is the dividing line. This is as far as you could go, and you got to stop. So as he makes this type, he's talking about an end time event if we notice what the next verse says. The violation. Revelation 13:1 says, he stood on the sand of the seashore. Now, if we understand what's going on here, he would be Satan because the antecedent was talking about the serpent and the woman. The woman fled to the mountains. So it is Satan that stands now on the sand of the seashore. And then look what happens. I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. We know this represents the empire of the Antichrist, all the peoples behind him, all the nations behind him. And guess what? They've crossed into God's cosmic geography. Satan stands on the scene. He says, okay, Antichrist, go ahead and charge. I am now allowing you to go and violate the eternal decree of Jeremiah, enter into God's sacred land and do what we have planned. Well, this is kind of important because then the beach symbolically represents the boundary between God and the sea. So, in essence, the sea symbolizes Satan's realm, which is his cosmic geography. The beach symbolizes the boundary between them. And then you have God's land, or as it talked about, his world in the parable of the tares and the wheat, that now Satan and the Antichrist are violating and entering into. The eternal decree is broken. The beach is important because at the end of the age, like even before this time, it is as far as Satan's realm could go. It could not go beyond the sea. So the wicked could go no further. So that's why the dragnet is stopping on the beach, and it's going to go that far because otherwise, to go further, it would be bringing in the bad fish into God's cosmic geography, or the bad people into God's cosmic geography, into his holy land. So the beach then becomes the staging area for the final placement of what are referred to as bad fish and good fish. So the bad fish, they're going to go get cooked. They're going into the furnace of fire where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's where people are going to suffer. If you right now are revolting against God, rethink this. There's a lot of suffering that you're going to face for eternity. The good fish are really not as good as you think, and I will explain that later, but they are allowed to go into other containers for another purpose. Sometimes when we're trying to get together and get answers to words, you find they're not present in the Bible. Such is the case with containers, just as in the case of barns was with the wheat and the tares, not found in the Bible. So, what would a believing scribe do when he was interpreting this parable about the dragnet? He would use a process called sharp awareness. Later, it was called pepel. Literally, it comes from the Hebrew word for pepper. So, what is sharp awareness? Okay, well, let's go ahead and work through the process. The first thing he would ask himself is why in containers? Then would he probably say, well, the implication is these fish are good for use. So we're not going to throw them into the fire. We're going to find a way of storing them. Then the next question he would ask, what makes them good? Only God is good. Well, then he says, well, they are different from the other fish, so they are put away in storage because they are different from the other fish. Well, how are they different? Well, they're different because they're not going to be destroyed in the furnace. So there's a reason for this. Well, what does that imply? Well, it implies they will continue living where the bad fish are going to be killed. Well, With Satan's sea being destroyed and the good fish not destroyed, they're granted access into the millennial kingdom. Is that what it is saying? Are these our guests at the wedding banquet that we've often wondered about? Well, it's a possibility, but what we find is other scriptures that would give him some help. We would find in Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3, that anybody who curses Israel, God will curse. Anyone who blesses Israel, God will bless. See, this is the start of a new dispensation. It is the end of the dispensation of grace, which we refer to as the church age. And now we are entering a new dispensation, and people will be judged differently for their faith. Now, you also have the sheep of Matthew 25:31 through 46. It's the sheep and the goat parable. What you will recognize within those parables, I'm sorry, that particular parable, is the sheep did not know Jesus. Because when Jesus said they did something to him, they said, when? We don't remember doing this to you. And then he says, every time you did it to one of my brothers, it was as though you were doing it unto me. So they got in there based upon the principle of the Abrahamic covenant. They blessed Israel, and doing so, they were blessing the brothers of Jesus. And for this reason, they're guaranteed access into the kingdom. So now, before I get into expanding our paraphrase, I just want to add one thing, that what is understood about the end of the age parables of the wheat and the tares and the dragnet and of the good fish is that both of these two groups, the wheat and the good fish, get into the millennial kingdom not by dying, but by living. And this is because there is going to be a 1,000-year reign of Christ. And for 1,000 years, as he reigns, his empire will be the ruling empire. And also, these will be the people that will start repopulating the world at that given time. Now, let's talk about expanding the paraphrase. Again, I'm going to take all the stuff that I've learned and I'm going to rewrite the paraphrase of the parable of the dragnet. And this is what I come up with. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like the angelic host cast into Satan's dominion, gathering people of every nation. And when completed, the angels hauled them up to the staging area, and they sat down, preparing the righteous people, the good fish, for further existence. But the wicked the angels threw away into the furnace of hell for eternal suffering. And so it will be at the end of the age. So we've revised here all our definitions based upon what we've learned from the dragnet, the sea, the fish of every kind, the beach, and the containers. So now what? What do we do with what we've learned? Know this, that this parable does not apply to the church. I know many people teach that it does, but it is talking specifically about the people that will get into the kingdom of heaven with their natural bodies. The church returns with Jesus Christ in their glorified bodies. Also, know that only the bad die young. Reflect on what pleases God. Don't think about what the world is doing. They're going to take you down to the bottom of that sea. If Satan wants to bring you down, God wants to lift you up. reflect always on what pleases Him so that you could experience the kingdom of heaven. Lastly, what you see will end. The realm of Satan, his cosmic geography, this world, which operates according to the enemy's desire, which is completely evil, will come to an end. And the world, along with Satan and all his angels, will be judged accordingly. I invite you to subscribe. I invite you to share this video with another. And if you got comments, please email me them. Thank you again for joining us. Again, my name is Vince, and I am so glad you joined us today, and may God bless you richly. And I look forward to meeting you all in the kingdom of heaven. Remember, we are going to do the parable structure of Matthew 13 because it solves a puzzle.